Drivers to exercise caution on our nation's roads. We stand in solidarity with agencies, of course, such as Arrive Alive and other like-minded agencies. It is our belief that enhancing the visibility and frequency of patrols and regular checkpoints by the Ministry of Homeland Security and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, especially as we are aware in the rainy season and hurricane season, would further bolster safety measures on our roads. As it relates to the Stand Your Ground legislation, we advise the government to be cautious about the implementation of the Stand Your Ground legislation. According to a study, and we know that this government is using the Florida model, according to a study conducted by the Oxford University, the introduction in 2005 of the Stand Your Ground legislation laws in Florida have been linked to a 24% increase in homicides and a 31% rise in homicides involving firearms, with the largest proportional increase occurring in the 20 to 34 age group, according to a study, as I indicated, by the Oxford University. At this point in time, Florida ranks 22nd in the United States for gun homicide and gun assault rates. On average, 3,038 people die and 6,358 are injured by gun violence in Florida each year. So that using the Florida model, which is what this government is using, we would of course want to recommend some consultations with the public before this particular piece of legislation is implemented. As it relates to fiscal responsibility and budget management, on May the 30th, 2025, a release from the Ministry of Planning and Economic Affairs and Development stated that the government will be seeking between US 2 to US 5 billion over the next 3 to 5 years from the World Bank, from the Inter-American Development Bank, and from the international financial centers. Of course, we look forward to some more information as it relates to this, because without delving into details, it is difficult to determine how much of this US 5 billion window is intended to compromise central government debt, what percentage is to compromise grant facilities, and what percentage is targeted at the private sector. We know that currently the central government total external debt measures is some US 5.6 billion, with over 800 million annually required to be sourced to make these debt servicing payments. The last one would be the issue of the virtual courts. The opposition, is concerned about the impact of the recent statements by the government, more specifically the Minister of Homeland Security, calling for the removal of courts from police stations. We were aware that an arrangement was established between the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Judiciary, whereby the TTPS would assist with a virtual access customer center for accused persons appearing virtually. The Judiciary has been informed by the TTPS that they can no longer fully staff the court system. Of course, our main concern is the impact on both defendants as well as victims and the overall system of justice in Trinidad and Tobago. So those are some of the issues that we would want to address today. As I indicated, I'm joined by my colleagues, and we look forward to any questions. Of course, if there are other matters that you wish to raise, we will be willing to answer as well. So the floor is now open for any questions.
Just on the very last thing you mentioned, my question...
The virtual courts?
Right, whether police stations ought to be venues for courts. The question is, if the police are a prosecuting agency, in fact, actually, they are conducting every single stage, from the arrest to the investigation to the law court prosecution. Is it really even-handed to have a prosecuting agency like in control of the actual premises? You know, that would have been my question. I did have another question on the gun violence. I mean, there are some Trinis who would hear your figures about Florida and would actually cheer because they may say, well, those are the bad guys, you know. So my question would be, if the opposition and the government would look into the stories behind the statistics and disaggregate them and find out for every 100 guns that are issued legally, what proportion are used in justifiable cases of self-defense, or what proportion are used, well, I reach home early from work and I catch my wife in bed with the pool boy, you know. These are the issues. So I don't know if anybody had any thoughts. Thanks.
Well, I would ask Faris to answer shortly. But of course, I mean, we are based right now on the common law system, on the British system. So this stand your ground legislation means that where you talk traditionally about reasonable defense, if somebody comes into your home, that no longer exists. So it's a question where the defendant or the victim, I guess at that point in time, you don't really have to retreat. So you're just, you can deal with the situation as you see fit. Once you think your life is in danger, what we have at present is the issue of using, you know, a reasonable defense in order to act if somebody comes into your home. So if you go over and above, then of course you have to go into the whole system of your inquiry, and the court will then have to decide, did you go over and above what was expected? This system is simply, if you think your life is in danger and somebody comes into your home, as you said, you stand your ground and you can immediately react. So that is where the situation is. But as it relates to the issue of research, I mean, the Oxford University, which is one of the main universities that have done the research, not only as it relates to Florida, but a multiplicity, because a lot of the southern states, whether in Georgia, you know, Pennsylvania, a lot of those states are the states where you have the standing ground legislation existing. And we have seen, like, for example, in the George Floyd and other cases, we have seen the consequences of them not carefully examining this situation, because it's simply, you know, you decide that I have the rights to act. And I mean, we have to be mindful that we are in a scenario where the public is extremely concerned about crime. I mean, people genuinely are fearful for their lives. So that once you don't feel safe, people are looking, of course, for some solution as it relates to crime. But on the other side of it, we have to also say it's not just the question of legislation, it's a question of policing, it's a question of judicial system. I mean, when you think about domestic violence, for example, what are some of the consequences? What are the social issues? So it's a multiplicity of factors as a country, in my view, we have to look at as it relates to how we deal with the issue of crime. Yeah. You want to go first? Okay. Sure.
So, good morning, everyone. Just to address the issue of stand your ground and the context, since 1628, the common law has recognized one's right in one's home and property to stand your ground on any attack. That's the common law. In fact, if you do the research, it's called the castle principle, in that the common law says that if you are under attack in normal circumstances, you have a right, or you ought to retreat. But there's an exception to that. If you're in your home and you're being attacked, there's no duty on you to retreat, because your home is your castle. That's why it's called the castle doctrine. So the common law is there to protect persons' rights, and there's Section 7 of the Offences Against the Persons Act, which says that no penalty will arise from someone who acts in reasonable self-defense, and that is buffered by the law in Palmer, which outlines the fact that if you're under attack in your home, or your property is under attack, you have a right to exercise reasonable self-defense. You must not, of course, take a hammer to kill a fly, so it ought to be proportionate. But what we are saying is that there must be caution when you introduce carte blanche laws from other jurisdictions, such as Florida, the Leader of the Opposition has explained the proliferation of gun-related offenses in Florida since the introduction of this law. And we think that the common law, along with the statute, gives an adequate protection now for persons who are under attack in their homes. The government has said they will present a policy on it. We are not aware of that policy. That policy has not been communicated to the opposition. It's not been communicated to the country. So we will await that policy to see what is the jurisprudential underpinnings, what informs it, if they have looked at the common law to see if the common law is correct, if there's a mischief that they want to cure. But until such time, the common law provides adequate protection for persons who are under attack in their property.
I think what we have to be mindful of is that what the government is, they're going a little further. So it's not just a question of your home. If you look at, if you look at the legislation that exists in Florida, it's also, for example, public spaces and if you're in a vehicle. So I think that is going to be the big difference in terms of the extending of the law.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Just to follow on again on the individual topic of stand your ground, Sean had actually asked two questions, one about virtual courts and who's in control of courts, and then the second aspect was stand your ground. Stand your ground. What is your ground? In Trinidad and Tobago, where we have a very large squatting community, a very large HDC community, take San Fernando West, 25,000 registered people to vote, 11,500 live in HDC communities, and 3,500 live in squatting. So what's your ground? Will there be any quality of treatment? Is your neighbor's yard that you now claimed for 2 years your yard or his yard? Where your children play in a community center in an area and you perceive threat, where we have an issue of gang violence, where there is a perceived inequality amongst our people in the first place. You must remember in the United States of America, things like property tax identify every single piece of land. It's owned, it's paid for, it's measured. There are rights and covenants. You don't cut your grass, the city intervenes and does it for you and you pay for it. But what is your ground in Trinidad and Tobago? How do you make sure that it isn't a law for the one aspect of our society when all are crying out for it? The Leader of the Opposition has plainly said that we must see the policy behind this, and that our position as to whether we stand for or against this law is to be examined reasonably dependent upon the policy and the prescription. Of course, we take note that there are entities yet to be formed to have consultation, etc. But I think we have to start at the very basic principles as the Leader of the Opposition put forward and Mr. Scotland, Senior Counsel, put forward on the parameters of the law and the facts. What is defense? How is your common law on self-defense going to be amended going forward? What about people in custody now? Will there be a revision? We do know the law speaks to things being prospective unless it's specifically said to be retrospective, and there's certain terms and conditions. We have saved law constitutionally, Section 6 of the Constitution. We have the Offences Against the Persons Act, which is again a statutory provision. So it is not a straightforward, simple position where on one hand you're saying to the population, empty the matic, empty the clip, stand your ground. We as an opposition must look at all of the parameters and say, well, what is your ground? Where are you going to defend? Who are you defending? As the Leader of the Opposition put forward, in a public space, in your car, in positions. But remember, the United States is also tied to a very seriously entrenched and ancient provision, I should say old, of their constitutional amended version of the right to carry arms and to bear arms. So it is an ecosystem that this law must be looked at. We're very eager to see what is coming. We stand for what is right in terms of the sentiment of a society, but it must be applied proportionately. When we come to another topic, which the leader will tee off and which Mr. Gonzalez will speak to, and then hopefully I'll rejoin, on the issue of demerit points. That's another point that you can come to. If I could just touch while I'm at the microphone, the first point that Sean raised, which was the issue of TTPS and virtual courts. As Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, I had the privilege of piloting the criminal division, the family and children division. We also had the road traffic courts and the magisterial reforms that brought about our move from a petty civil court to a district court. It was in 2016, 2017, etc., that we introduced virtual courts as a feature of the law. COVID came and catalyzed its introduction, but the system was already there to replace just those 1 or 2 virtual courts we had from Tobago and from San Fernando in the High Court. We also did a significant reform of the magistracy. If you remember, the magistracy came in to access to justice, and there was a complaint that the magistracy was old school. You had to write notes. There was no computerized system. There were no clerks of the peace in the form of a registrar. We amended the entire system of the law. And in treating with virtual courts, it was always intended that virtual courts would assist in the management of positions in access to justice. There was once a cry, if I may remind you, that we had a complaint about prisoner transportation. If you recall, when that was a huge cost that everybody complained about, $40 million a year, $60 million a year, and a significant reduction, we as a government had the pleasure of opening virtual courts in the prisons, stopping the move of prisoners. Now, the leader of the opposition said something quite quickly that if you'd allow me just to focus on as it comes to courts. The Domestic Violence Act, as an example, specifically in the law that we amended in 2020, we brought about an introduction into emergency protection orders. If you go to the 2020 Act, Part 4A, and you go to Section 19, that you may make an emergency application where the applicant is in distress. And I vividly recall in piloting that law that it was a feature of society asking for the fact that you could be at a police station at midnight on a Sunday accessing a judge to give a protection order, and that these things are inherent in the access to justice point, both for the accused and for the victim and for the prosecutorial agencies. We have underwritten our position on law and reform to law in 4 principles: plant and machinery, people, process, and law. And in the process mapping, it was always anticipated that virtual courts would exist. The judiciary statement is very important. And I note the media statement from the judiciary. It was issued on May 30th, 2025, where the judiciary took note of the express headline, "Get Courts Out of Stations," etc. And they reminded that police stations were not courts, and converting a police station into a courtroom is just a matter of putting an accused in front of a computer for a virtual appearance so that somebody who is charged may appear on the same day virtually. Now, why do you appear before a court virtually without having to be transported to some court? The transport didn't arrive. The policeman wasn't there to escort you. You got there, the registrar was missing, the virtual complainant didn't come. Why go through all of that when at a police station you have the ability to open a laptop and have processes? And I want to remind you that the judiciary isn't a matter of 15 people hiding behind the computer and 1 person in front of it, and that person has a gun or a whip. The judiciary has specific protocols for appearances. The room, the manner in which the court sees the accused, the interrogation. We didn't just throw away the appearance of an accused before a justice of the peace or the rules of evidence or other factors like that. So it is really a retrograde step to just in a carte blanche way say virtual court shouldn't happen from police stations, particularly when the TTPS is on record as having complained that there is a difficulty in the attendance of police officers from time to matters. We need to bear in mind that there are appropriate rules, criminal proceedings rules in this case, and the children's rules, if you go down to the children's court, And in the case of children who appear as accused, you have children's attorneys. You have a number of safeguards in the system that are legislatively anchored. And the last thing that I'd say on that, you note that this complaint hasn't come before even once since 2016. Not even once. The police representation that they have in their second division and their representative, I can't say union, but their body, has never, the association, complained about this. Justices of the peace, the criminal bar, the persons involved in the user feedback, the law association, out of the blue. Police stations are not to be courtrooms, when in fact they're not. Virtual appearances are things that improve the access to justice, and I think we need to do some deeper delving into matters like this. I know TTT is not here, so I can't use that expression, but I think that we need to have a deeper look onto these matters, because the one-liners can take us into a very dangerous place. So I'll see you back if there's need on further issues. Thank you.
Oh, he wants to say something? Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that, Ria. So, good afternoon, members of the media. I think it's just afternoon, 2 minutes away from morning time, afternoon time. I just want to comment a bit on the government's proposal to scrap or to cancel the demerit point system in this country without any recommendations as to what it will do to ensure that we have safer roads in Trinidad and Tobago. Just want to remind the national population that the demerit point system did not just came about and was not just pulled out of a hat. You have to go back to 2009 or 2008 when Trinidad and Tobago was recording somewhere in the region of over 250 road fatalities on an annual basis. The highest amount of road fatalities, not only in the Western Hemisphere, but certainly in the Caribbean. At that point in time, the government of the day was under tremendous public pressure to introduce a number of road safety initiatives to ensure that we have safer roads in this country. And leading the charge was none other than Arrive Alive, where a number of meetings were held at the Ministry of Works and Transport as it was then, and a number of proposals were made with respect to what we can do to improve safety on our roads in Trinidad and Tobago. Just imagine Trinidad and Tobago having an annual road fatality rate of over 250 deaths. 250 deaths. And the data was presented to us that, listen, these are just not deaths, but the impact that they were having on lives, the impact that they were having on children, on families, their livelihood, etc. Because a number of those victims coming out of a serious road accident, they could no longer be employed, they have to depend on social security, it was a burden on the health system, and these kinds of data are not presented to citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And what did we do as a result of that? I was a technocrat in the Ministry of Works and Transport at that point in time, and that's the reason why I can speak confidently on those matters. As a result of that, we introduced a number of road safety initiatives, which included DUI legislation, seatbelts, mobile phone regulations, speed detection devices, helmets for motorcycles, the U-turn system, which overhauled the entire system with respect to road fixed penalty ticketing system in Trinidad and Tobago, and the demerit point system. Now, these legislative initiatives came about over a period of a decade, maybe 10 years or so. And as a result, as they were being introduced on an incremental basis, we witnessed an incremental decline in road fatalities in Trinidad and Tobago, to the extent that by 2020 and 2021, when all of these initiatives were introduced, Trinidad and Tobago, being one of the only countries in the world, recorded a 60% decline in road fatalities. For the very first time, Since 1956, Trinidad and Tobago recorded its annual road fatality rate at under 100 since 1956. And that is because as we introduced road safety initiatives, policies, and legislation, we saw drivers changing their behavior. And as they changed their behavior, our roads were safer to drive. Now let me speak about the demerit point system. Why would someone be so opposed to a demerit point system? Some people regard it as very punitive and what have you. What is the demerit point system? It's a simple system that tracks the behavior of a driver on the road. So, if you commit a road traffic violation, DUI, driving without your seatbelts, dangerous and reckless driving, you have the prescribed amount of demerit points that once you pay your fixed penalty ticket, the points are placed on your record in order to track the behavior of the driver. So much so that if you accumulate certain amounts of demerit points over a 3-year period, you are written to by the licensing division and you are warned that you are approaching the 12 points or 9 points threshold, and if you cross it, you are asked to participate in a driver's rehabilitation program. Simple as that, a driver's rehabilitation program. 2 or 3 years after the demerit point system was introduced in Trinidad and Tobago, the statistics were very staggering. Staggering because it is unimaginable that in this country you have people driving on our roads with over 200 demerit points. And you have to ask yourself, do we feel safe as citizens? Forget about us being politicians, members of parliament, policymakers, and what have you. How do we feel as a citizen driving on our roads when you have fellow drivers with over 200 demerit points on their driving records? 200 demerit points on your driving records suggest that almost every week you're committing serious traffic violations, and it determines whether or not you are a safe driver to be on our roads. The UNC now is telling the people of this country, coming out of a campaign promise, that this system is not good. It should be cancelled because it is populist. It will be attractive to people when they hear it. And without, as in UNC style, any proposal to ensure that we have safer roads in this country. And I'm saying here this morning, warning the government that whilst we are not seeing as a PNM opposition that the demerit point system is perfect, we do not have any perfect system. And perhaps we can identify ways in which we can improve the system. But to catch blood, revoke the demerit point system in this country, it is telling this country we are going back to the dark and dangerous days of over 250 and 300 road fatalities in this country. What is that saying to our mothers? What is that saying to our fathers? What is that saying to our families who have to traverse on our roads on a daily basis? Our children who have to traverse our highways and our byways going to school on a daily basis, where they now have to face the peril of dangerous and reckless driving. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, people of Trinidad and Tobago, we hear all kinds of negative things about this country, about nothing good is happening. But this country was recognized by international agencies as having a success story to be told where our road safety is concerned. A lot of our technocrats from the Ministry of Works and Transport were asked to participate in discussions where we can exchange, and they were asked to exchange information and the experiences and what have you, because Trinidad and Tobago was deemed to be a success story where road safety is concerned. And the UNC is saying, that is not good. It's easy to make a campaign promise, throw it out of the way, so that we can go back to those days where our roads are very, very perilous to travel. We are saying that no system is perfect. This is a system that has saved hundreds of lives. And therefore, if we should be responsible in the way that we should conduct ourselves, let us sit and have a conversation as to what we can do to improve the demerit point system. But to do otherwise, as the UNC is proposing, is inimical to the best interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Ask a question on the stand your ground
Yes, you want-
legislation. The UNC went to the electorate on the basis of this as a manifesto pledge,
Yeah, sure.
and they were rewarded with a mandate to do it. Has the PNM canvassed its own membership to find out if it is in favor of this legislation? And what would the PNM's position be if there is, if in doing so it finds that there is broad support in the society for this, given the crime situation? And I say this against the background of the fact that the PNM's arguments against stand your ground were strong before the election, but apparently not convincing. So do you see a scenario where the PNM may amend its opposition to this and come to some collaborative arrangement with the government to have this legislation passed with your blessing?
Yeah, well, remember, my main statement was the issue of consultation. And I did say that I believe that this is one of the issues that there should be consultation. And yes, there are, whilst I've been going out in the public domain, people have raised the concern. Now, I also made the point that about the consciousness of the opposition on the issue of crime. I mean, one of the reasons why this was raised is because a lot of people feel unsafe in their homes. So we cannot deny the fact that that is in the public domain, that people feel the issue of issuing of gun license, the kind of money you have to invest in terms of putting up cameras. I mean, you know, wherever you live in communities, if people can afford it, I mean, there's security. So it's a real issue. But in taking the situation or the policy as it relates to Florida, where you are not just your home, but you're extending it out into the public. And we know the gang violence, we know everything that occurs. Our issue is, do you have a document? Do you have a policy? Because if you simply say, stand your ground, right? And you don't say more, you don't say, okay, is it going to be a system? Are you going to use the Florida model? Because you don't have that in all, it's not there in all the states in the United States. Florida is one of the strongest ones because of the crime situation that has happened there. I mean, is that applicable to Trinidad? So our position is, and I have made it very clear when I spoke on the first day, having accepted my, my instrument of the willingness to collaborate. Right. So that I am saying that we see the policy, but most important for us would be the issue of consultation. Okay. And if you get to the stage where, I mean, clearly, if you do the consultation and, I mean, the public is overwhelming, then it is something clearly that you're going to have to look at. You can't just maintain a position if you have overwhelming support. But I believe the issue of education on this matter is absolutely critical. I mean, people have to be conscious of it because there are times where these things can work against you. In other words, you can develop a whole culture where people believe that you're the wild, wild west, so everybody should have a gun. And, so we have to ask ourselves as a society, I mean, in a sense, you also have a discourse on what actually is the cause of crime. You know, all of those things have to come into the picture. So the issue is, yes, always willing to address the issue of consultation. And as I made it clear, if you bring good legislation, we will be willing to collaborate and support.
And do you think that the tardiness or the lethargy in respect of the pepper spray legislation has contributed to this feeling that we have to go straight to the end of the road?
Well, again, that's a matter we have to do some research on because, you know, the truth is that, you know, we pass these pieces of legislation, people ask for it in the beginning, and then the issue of implementation, it becomes an issue. So, I mean, that is an excellent example. For example, that, people were really gung-ho on that and they felt it would have had an impact. And again, the implementation has been an issue, because when you talk about the issue of guns, I mean, we do have an issue of open borders, so that you want to, people might then, the tendency of the illegal arms, as well as we have to talk about the issue of customs and, how are we tracking, illegal ammunition and so coming into the country. So I'm saying all of those issues to me are equally important in terms of how you address the overall issue on crime. First, you want to add anything?
Just very quickly on the demerits and courts and systems, because it ties into virtual courts. I want you to remember, please, that demerit points were introduced as part of a system. Red light, traffic light enforcement, fixed penalty obligations as opposed to offenses, demerit points. So there is the upcoming event of, because we left it in gear, hopefully it'll come, of the inclusion of QR codes on number plates, because that is an element of fighting crime. If you know the owner of a car, whether the plate has been switched out, if it is the wrong plate to the car description, you must remember that one of the fundamental areas of digitization for the government was in the MVRT arena, motor vehicle and road traffic arena. That U-turn system is a combination of the judiciary, the licensing offices, the Ministry of Works and Transport, etc. It's a whole combined where you can literally see on a device all of the user inputs. I'd like you to, as the media, to inquire whether in the recent road fatalities, one of the drivers was not a person who had received a notice in respect of demerit points. That comes down to the actual inquiry. Let's get the facts as to whether our roads are going to be safer or not. And I also want you to please inquire, let's all have a discussion. The removal of demerit points isn't necessarily the removal of the sanction, because there's a sanction that comes to you in the act, not just in the 9th schedule. So you could eliminate all the demerit points in the 9th schedule. There is still the law inside of the Parent Act that allows a sanction to come. But one of the main motivating reasons for amending Section 20 of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act to make the road user conditional upon the driver's license and the vehicle registration, we moved offenses to fixed penalties and demerit points. And therefore, we stopped having to send 104,000 cases to the magistrates' court every year. What we said was, if you wish to contest your case, you bring the case by bringing a notice to contest. Before this introduction in 2017, which came live in 2020, every single policeman involved in road traffic had to turn up at court, call your name, summons. 104,000 cases a year in the magistrates' court, blocking justice. Remember that conversation? Access to justice, like virtual courts? With the introduction of demerit points, fixed penalties, and that whole combination, you saw a dramatic reduction in the number of cases in court. But as a real-life example, perhaps an inquiry ought to be made, obviously respectfully, because the deepest condolences go out to the tragedies that happen in road fatalities, including those over the weekend. It would be useful in an anonymized way to inquire about demerit points and how they affect persons who are victims of fatalities. I think that is a useful statistic for this. So just to remind you, the sanction without the demerit points means that the enforcement of road behavior and therefore how we manage ourselves is going to be much more difficult. And I think the last thing to say, because it was a live feature in the debate when we were introducing this law, was whether a law could change society's manner of behavior. Seatbelt law did. DUIs did. Demerit points did. We got a 65-year low in road traffic deaths. 65 years ago, there were bull carts on the road. There were not the number of vehicles that we have. To drop your number of road fatalities to a 65-year low shows that the law had a consequence. There is another way to treat with this. You can amend the number of demerit points which affect you. You can shorten the time frame for suspensions. You can have rehabilitation come faster. You can advertise the persons who are errant as opposed to going to find them at an old address which doesn't exist again. So there are alternative positions. And in keeping with our Leader of the Opposition's encouragement that there be consultation and data, I'm urging, please, if we could do this in a responsible way so we get the right result. Our government, when we left office, had done a number of amendments to the 9th schedule, which is where demerit points are. We had prepared them. There are further ones left in the system, but it isn't as simple as just removing all the demerit points. Thank you.
What's your response? How do you respond to the government scrapping the TTRE? Do you believe that it will negatively affect the country's revenue income?
I'll ask Mr. Wood. Yeah.
Thank you very much, my political leader, as of yesterday. I just want to clear up two issues. The reporter from the Newsday made a statement that the increase in homicides from stand your ground laws may be the killing of the bad guys. I'm afraid not. The studies show it's an increase in murders, which is unlawful killing. So go and check it. Check it yourself. No, I know. But I'm just saying, if you check it out, you will see it's an increase in murders. And this is based on studies going back 20 years. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean. And secondly, thank you, Sean. And secondly, sometimes the population votes for a particular party but does not accept all of the campaign promises or mandates that they make. And we experience that. The PNM experienced that, where we campaign on many things in our manifesto, but won the election twice, and then felt resistance. And the TTRA is a case in point. Property tax is a case in point, because we put both of those in our 2015 and our 2020 manifestos and campaigned on them, and we won. But the population pushed back, or sections of the population pushed back on that. So I don't agree that you can just automatically assume that the population voted for stand your ground law. With respect to the TTRA, there are many, many studies on this. And the whole point of the TTRA is to increase revenue and to cut out tax evasion. There are many, many studies worldwide and in Trinidad and Tobago. Several experts came to study our situation and determined, just in the case of value-added tax alone, that the evasion of tax payments with respect to value-added tax was in the region of $5 billion a year. So the tax gap, as it is called, which is the amount of tax that you should be collecting lawfully using your existing laws without changing anything, has been estimated to as much as $10 billion a year. So if the new government wants to scrap it, fine. They will have to find another way to find the revenue that we need, because we have been running deficit budgets for years to promote development, to promote economic growth, and so on. That's the primary purpose of our deficit budget, to keep economic momentum and to drive economic growth. And therefore, if the new government decides it doesn't want to go ahead with the TTRA, then they can say goodbye to $5 billion in additional revenue, which is desperately needed. So these sorts of actions, in my view, are just reckless. Similarly, with respect to property tax, it used to be called land and building taxes. It has a purpose. It is to finance local government infrastructure. It has always been so. The cities always collected property tax. The city of Port of Spain, the city of San Fernando, they called it house rates. That was just a different name. And it was used for the development of the cities. So if the new government wants to give up that, fine. They will have to find another source. I heard them say they will finance local government bodies in another way. I would love to see how they're doing that, because they also said they're cutting taxes. But when you look at their promises, it's all about reducing revenue and increasing expenditure. How are you going to balance the budget doing that? I would like to see. It was all a lot of populism and quite irrational promises, but we'll see how it goes. And then there's some things I'd like to say about some of the statements made. I'll have a lot more to say during the media review, so I will reserve any detailed commentary at this point in time. But I've looked at some of the statements made, and it's much ado about nothing. One of the first statements made is that there's a huge deficit in the month of May 2025, as if that is a revelation. If you went and checked the month of May for the last 30 years, you will see there is always a huge deficit in the month of May. And I'll explain why. Corporation tax, which is the primary source of revenue for the government, it includes taxes from the petroleum sector, are paid at the end of a quarter. So the end of a quarter will be December, March, June, September. Those are the quarterly areas where we receive huge amounts of revenue. So in any year, a government might receive $7 billion in the month of March, in the month of June, in the month of September. The other revenue source is royalties. Royalties are paid in the fourth month. So the first month after the end of a quarter, you receive royalties from oil and gas. So let's take this year, for example. We would have received significant revenue in March, a little less in April because that's when royalties are paid, and very little in May. Because in May you don't get corporation tax, you don't get petroleum profits tax, you don't get royalties. So May, the second month of the three, is always the driest month, with the least amount of revenue. So you may find in any given May, or take it to the next one, if you take it to the end of quarter June, you have August, July, August. August again would be an extremely dry month. So you might get $7 billion in March, and then you get $4 billion in April, and you might get $2 billion in May. And then you come back again to June, and you get $7 billion again. And that's what the government overdraft is used for. Because we know that cash flow is not uniform. They have a heavy inflow of revenue at the end of every 3 months, but you don't get it in the 2 months preceding that. So the government overdraft is used to deal with the shortfall in month 1 and month 2, and then the overdraft is replenished in month 3. So all of that carrying on about a huge deficit in May was completely unnecessary. It's normal. The other thing I've seen is the statement made by Minister Swarat. Again, much ado about nothing, and really smoke and mirrors, because he referred to the IFC, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, and the IDB. IDB has a private sector arm called IDB Invest. And both of these entities have lent hundreds of millions of US dollars to private companies in Trinidad and Tobago over the last several years. I can give you one very recent example where the Massey Group borrowed 150 million US dollars from IDB Invest, which is the private sector arm of the IDB. Just a couple of months ago, I think Minister Beckles, in one of her last appointments as a minister, attended that ceremony where the IDB was recognizing it had given Massey 150 million US dollars. So all of that carrying on about 5 billion US in diversification. It's just fluff, because the IDB Invest and the IFC, they lend to Republic Bank. They've lent Republic Bank over 100 million US. They lent to the TTMB just the other day for its program, its mortgage program. This is a standard thing. That is not money that is going to be borrowed by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. That is money being borrowed by the private sector, and that is what these private sector arms are all about. So it's just smoke and mirrors. But I won't say much more now, except that I find that the statements being made by this government, and I hope I don't fall into the definition of being arrogant, amateurish. Amateurish. They need to do better. Thank you.
The government is claiming that a lot of board members of state agencies are refusing to resign. What are your thoughts on that, maybe any advice you may have for these board members?
Are you sure that it's a lot? Or just some?
Reported speech on what the government is
I
claiming.
think it's just some. And if you look in the papers, you will see reference to Plebdeco. Now, Plebdeco is a company that's listed on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange. So it's governed by the rules of the stock exchange. And the directors of a company like that, Angostura is similar, National Flour Mills is similar, FCB is similar. All of these companies, the directors of these companies have a fiduciary duty to serve the interests of the organization rather than their own interests. To change the board of Plebdeco, you have to have a meeting, a special meeting of shareholders. So Corporation Sole, which is the person who has taken my position, Corporation Sole has to convene a meeting of shareholders because Corporation Sole, which is the Minister of Finance, owns 51% of Plebdeco. The other 49% owned by various entities and is trading on the stock exchange as well. So there's a process. And if the directors just resign en masse, Plebdeco, a listed company, would be in breach of the Securities and Exchange Commission Act. So it would be irresponsible of the directors of Plebdeco, which is a limited liability company, so it's governed by the Companies Act and by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the rules of the stock exchange. It would be completely irresponsible of them to just resign just so. If you look at one of the articles in the newspaper this morning, you see the chairman of Plebdeco making the point, the new group of directors has not been proposed. So what you're going to do, tell them to just go, and what you now have a listed company on the stock exchange with no board. That's why I call them amateurs. There's no problem. As soon as the shareholder comes and says, look, I want all of you all to leave, convenes a special meeting, passes a resolution to replace the current directors with new directors, that's the end of it. It's simple. It's much ado about nothing. Okay? So you got the point? It's completely different. Just hold on. It's completely different to a wholly owned state enterprise that is not listed. I could just pick one, RDC or CPEP or something like that. Yes, Rhea.
Yeah, so I'm amazed at what you just said.
You're amazed?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because the impression has been given that these people are just so recalcitrant and
So you think it's a false impression?
What?
These people have fiduciary responsibilities. They could be fined.
Not specified.
They could be fined by the registrar of companies. They could be fined by the SEC. They can't just resign just so. They have a responsibility. This is a listed company. You think the directors of FCB could just up and resign just so? And decisions have to be made on a day-to-day basis in these entities? You got it?
What I'm seeing on social media, they are posting pictures of some of these people. Not just Wati, I think is her name. There's another guy who's, they said he's a director on the CDB. And they're saying these people are refusing to resign. And, you know, this is the situation that we have. Yes, they're pillorying these people and
It's
holding them
entirely
up to-
irresponsible and reprehensible. They have to remain until they are replaced. If it's an ordinary company, and I could use an example, let's say Rural Development or CPEP or UDCOT or one of those, they could just go, and the government next day could appoint a whole new board. But a listed company, there's a process. You have to give notice. You can't just hold a meeting of a listed company just so, you know. You can't get up today and say, I'm holding a meeting tomorrow, you know. There's a notice period in the law, in the bylaws of the company. Usually it's 14 days, 21 days of a notice of a meeting of shareholders to change the board of directors. You can't just do it by VAPs.
Who are the other directors of Plebdeco and the other shareholders, sorry, and why are they being silent on an issue that they clearly would understand?
I find that this is a common thing in Trinidad and Tobago, especially when the government changes. They're afraid. It's as simple as that.
makes me think of another example. This situation, because I'm seeing the same vilification of people. This situation involving the national security, well, the Homeland Security and Defense Ministry, where a permanent secretary took a certain action, allegedly to take a check to a former minister. Now, the minister Hines could defend himself, the former minister, but the permanent secretary and I think a PS, a deputy PS or acting PS, as well as some, they are being held up to public ridicule. And I've seen blogs with Arnil Roberts and Philip Alexander, who are not even involved in that ministry, talking about the PS being a mailman, and this is the kind of thing they're doing. And I mean, it's just public servants being attacked. I haven't heard the opposition defending these people, so I want to find out, what do you do as senior public servants when this kind of changeover takes place, and in an effort to do your job or to be helpful? This is the kind of risk that you take.
Well, I would prefer that the leader of the opposition would answer that, but I'll just say one thing, that this again is not unknown. There have been many changes of governments where public servants have been attacked and alleged to have been agents of the former government and being attacked unjustifiably and humiliated and ridiculed, as you have pointed out. But with respect to the general point, I don't have enough information on that, so I will hand this over to the leader of the opposition, or anybody else. The leader would like to talk.
I'll talk after.
I just also want to add that the report is that the PS was transferred, 2 PSs, to the office of the Prime Minister. So punitive action was taken without apparent due process.
So if I may just tee it up a little bit further for the leader of the opposition, we have been in serious reflection on this general issue. The scandalizing of board members in public companies, where you face sanction under stock exchange and securities and exchange laws for improper action. Just to remind you that corporations sold their 44 wholly owned companies. It's listed on the Ministry of Finance website. You can see it. 44 wholly owned companies. You can bring a cabinet note today and replace everybody, because he who appoints can disappoint in those kinds of ways. But to step out into the public domain and scandalize people, carrying articles, for instance, by a former Attorney General as a legal representative for people saying, I'm not listening to you because you should change and you don't have the government's mandate, that ought to be known to be in conflict with the law. Section 99 of the Companies Act is very clear as to fiduciary responsibility and liability, particularly when this government in a previous incarnation sued people, a vast number of people, for breach of fiduciary obligations, and then those cases fell apart. But on the issue that we were just speaking about, which is of concern, and this is persons who are being scandalized, not only public servants, I want to mark the spot that there are a number of employees of companies who are being targeted as well. And again, to repeat the caution, when you see the reportage that ministers of government are arriving at entities and calling for contracts and reviewing contracts themselves as ministers, that is a breach of the minister's reach. It is an action that is outside of the law. A minister handles under Section 85 of the Constitution policy prescriptions. Even board members cannot get involved in management under the State Enterprises Manual. You see that under the Companies Act, under the Companies Learning. What we're seeing right now, and we're receiving much of the conversation, but which we wish to confirm, because a responsible opposition has to confirm with particulars certain things. I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say. We're getting the stories back of teeing up for firing. I want to remind you, in 2010, 5,000 plus URP workers were the first to go 315 persons took action as well. But CPEP is being earmarked, and we will come with more, for mass firings. 10,000 odd workers, structures. So this whole position of waking up one day with a promise that everybody wins when you win, then understanding, well, for others to win, you have to lose, or the constant criticism, there is a vast amount of defamation and scandal which will be dealt with. But we have to make sure that we deal with this in a responsible way. I think the last thing that I will say, I am acutely aware that a loss is a loss and a win is a win. And in the first month of a government's tenure, they are entitled to settle in. And we are entitled to reflect. And we must be careful not to act on hyperbole and speculation, but to get facts so that we can be responsible in not only what we say, but what we do. But I'd like to caution the government that irresponsible action, witch hunting, mass firings, persecution, scandalizing will not be tolerated and will be met with full force. Because there are people who you normally speak to, warm and friendly people, afraid to say hello to you in the corridor. All of my colleagues can testify to that. People are mortified, afraid to say hello to anybody who was once in a hall of power. When I was Attorney General and I came into office, not a single person that I inherited was dismissed. My personal secretary was Anand Ramlogan's personal secretary and stayed so. Nobody was dismissed. The board of Plipdeco stayed till 2021. They weren't dismissed. Minister Imbert was corporation sold. He didn't scandalize the board because he was aware of the stock exchange and securities and exchange and public shareholding positions, particularly in a volatile market such as this. So I urge the need for responsibility, and I'd leave it for the leader of the opposition to take the main call.
You raised a very significant issue as it relates to the posting of persons' personal information and aggressive attacks on social media. It is the quintessential definition of cyberbullying. And in Trinidad and Tobago, it is illegal. And just to ensure the definition of cyberbullying, so we put it on record, it is the use of technology to harass, threaten, embarrass, or target another person, online threats and means aggressive and rude texts, tweets, posts, messages, or posting of pictures and information of others designed to hurt and ridicule. That's the definition of cyberbullying. And how could we countenance that now? The cyberbullying of persons in Trinidad and Tobago by those in authority, by government ministers and persons put there. That is unacceptable. I've put the definition on the record so you can know this is not the opposition just speaking. It is out there in the public domain, and it is now for you to judge. Thank you.
Just one last thing is the issue, of course, of from time to time in doing consultations, people making it very clear that they're not going to offer themselves to serve on boards. Because what they are seeing is that based on the government's action, fear is being put into the public domain. And people feel that they're going to find their pictures, probably even their personal business on the television, on the radio, on Facebook, and social media. And as we said, particularly permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries. I mean, when you have an incident like that, everybody becomes fearful that you can be the next person that would be targeted in the public domain. Any further questions?
Just to delve more into these mass firings, right?
Yes.
Right? It was just up there yesterday, Minister Padarat, right? Yeah. We have the issue of TSTT, for example, where I know that Senator Alwari would have mentioned, let let me get the exact thing that you're saying. Basically, the idea of government ministers out of reach or going into these ministries, reviewing contracts and stuff like that, right? We have a lot of people that are very fearful, contract workers, also permanent workers, that they will be fired. So I want to get the opposition's response to that. It's not just TSTT. We have other ministries, for example, under local government. Well, definitely that ministry as well. We have Khadija Amin saying that a lot of these policies and initiatives that were put in place, for example, to tackle local government reform, is currently being under review. So when persons are hearing these words as being under review and being looked at and stuff like that, they are very fearful about their jobs. I want to know, what is your response to those mass firings, or at least threat towards losing your jobs?
Well, I mean, it's for the public to take note of the fact that this slogan of when UNC wins, everybody wins, that was not at all serious. And you cannot, within a month of assuming office, or first week or second week, whether you go to WASA, whether you go to TSTT, whether you go to the Ministry of Youth, I mean, your first objective is to send a clear message to employees that you're going to review contracts, you're going to review policies, and you're going to remove persons. So the public very soon will understand in no uncertain terms that they really were not serious, that everybody was going to win. And what they are doing is making it abundantly clear that they are going to be removing persons. Well, it's not even a question of renewing contracts, but where possible, they really do not care whether or not the contract allows them to terminate in the way in which they intend. They have gone into those several ministries to remove anybody who they feel they want to remove and replace them with their people.
We didn't touch on the topic of Oando. There are talks of the refinery being open, then the refinery not being open. What is the opposition stance on this right now?
Okay, that matter we will deal with next week. Yes. Yes, we will have weekly. I mean, as I said, the office was officially open yesterday, so yes, we will have weekly, every week.
Just, there is on the ground or even on social media, a perception that Pennelope Beckles Robinson is, to quote them, boring. How do you respond to that, and how do you view that perception?
Well,
is it important?
I haven't heard that. Maybe you have heard that on the ground. I haven't heard the question of boring. I mean, I have heard the question that people have said they found you haven't been speaking enough, but this is the first one I've heard about being boring. So, I mean, I would love I don't know what's the definition of boring, right? But, I mean, the truth is I have explained my point. I mean, our leader of the opposition office is now open. It was open yesterday, and we are here having the next day. Yesterday was nomination day. And some people may have felt that you're not aggressive enough, you're not speaking enough. I mean, the government has been in office just over a month, and I made it very clear that as leader of the opposition, there are certain responsibilities you have. Once the issue of my leadership was addressed and you can speak on behalf of the party, yes, you will do that, which, So I don't know. I don't know that a politician is supposed to be exciting. I mean, I'm not really quite sure what that means. But I haven't heard that on the ground. I mean, and I have, since assuming responsibility as the leader of the opposition, I have been through the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. And no, I haven't heard that comment.
As a former planning minister, what are your thoughts on the government's threat or the government's suggestion that they will be taking over UAD campus? Is that something that can be done in the government, or how far can they reach in terms of?
Well, I'll ask, yes, I'll ask my colleague, former minister. Yes, you're here. Yeah.
Pleasant, good afternoon. The relationship between the UB and the Davie campus and the government at that time needs to be fully established. And I, for one, have been asking, where is the voice of the Minister of Education, Tertiary Education and Skills Training on this matter? Have not heard any explanation as to what exactly is the nature of the relationship that was developed between the UNC government and the UWI. If that campus is to be branded a UWI campus as it was expected to be, then there must have been some understanding, some contract that would have denoted the relationship between the UWI and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I have asked, and I am awaiting the voice of the minister with regards to what exactly is the nature. I've heard the Prime Minister say that there is no deed for the land and it's not in UWI's name, but that is not necessarily the entire understanding as to what the nature of that relationship was. Now, the UWI was very interested in creating a global school of medicine at that Davie campus. And that was the nature of the discussion when I would have assumed tenure as Minister of Education from 2020. And at the level of the council, there would also have been that level of discussion and an agreement that that is the direction that it would have gone in. Obviously, that is at variance with the original intent of the UNC government at the time when the campus was developed for the use of the campus. And therefore, I would have asked the question before with the media, what exactly determines now the use of the campus? What is the needs analysis that has been done? Has the government and UWI had discussion about exactly what are the pressing needs? The Global School of Medicine was developed, that proposal, in response to the fact that the governments of the region, not just Trinidad and Tobago, were not able to necessarily meet all of the financial requirements of the UWI as they would have, and therefore the UWI needed to be more self-sufficient with regard to funding. And so just as they opened a fee-paying program in Mount Hope, UWI has done that for some years now, they were looking to expand that type of model and to expand their self-sufficiency with the Global School of Medicine. So if that is not the plan going forward, then I would like to know, as a citizen as well, what is happening in terms of where is the need for what was put forward. So that really is the understanding, and I await some more information coming from the government, coming from the minister, with regards to the exact nature, what are the needs analysis, what was done to determine what is the best use of the campus at this time and how it's going forward. But certainly I can tell you that the adversarial type of approach, that is not the type of relationship that the region has for years encouraged with the UWI. It's always been collaborative and so on. Yes, the governments of the region do have a big say in what happens with UWI and how we progress and how we proceed. However, that is not the spirit of the collaboration, and that has not been what it has been for many years.
I'd like to ask whether you have assigned responsibilities to create what is basically the shadow cabinet at this point. And I also would like, really sort of related to that, Mr. Stuart Young had said yesterday on Facebook that thousands of people, he made the claim that thousands of people had sort of asked him to contest a position on the executive. Today, this guy, Ferdy Ferreira, was on TV saying, you know, he did not support you for leader, but he wishes you well and so on. What is your message to those persons who may not have supported you and who may have supported other people? What is your message to them at this point? So it's two things.
Yes, I mean, I haven't completed the assignments, but I have gone through with my colleagues. Of course, there are 13 of us, you know, and there are several ministries. Yeah. Yes. So yes, we are completing that exercise. And I mean, of course, they are changing from time to time. So yes, we are dealing with that assignment both in the Senate and in the House. I mean, if you look coming from, you know, Eric Williams, George Chambers, Mr. Manning, Dr. Rowley, when there is a change in leadership, those are things you're going to expect. I don't know of any person who becomes a leader that you'll have everybody supporting you initially. But my thing is that once you have become the political leader, your responsibility is to engage. I mean, to consult. I mean, I have the good fortune of a number of my colleagues, whether they are persons who are now on the 13 or others, that you can utilize if you want to rebuild the party. You can't do it by yourself. You need, and you have to create an environment where people feel comfortable enough. And I have seen it in Balize House. I've seen people coming and people feeling that there is hope. So I have the responsibility to not only to send the message, but in terms of what you do as you go out in the public domain, which I have been doing. And that is why when people say sometimes that you haven't been talking, the point about it is I understand from my own constituency that people have been hurting. People are disappointed. People did not come out to vote. So you have to go back into the public domain. You have to go back into your constituencies. There are a number of constituencies who are openly saying that there has been a disconnect, that the leadership didn't come, we haven't been seeing you. So how do you send that message? And people have been extremely happy that I've taken the position actually to come to the constituencies and talk to, especially in some of the areas where we don't have members of parliament. So my message is that in the rebuilding exercise, one of the most important issues is to listen more, and find solutions and give hope, because you exist as a political party to get into government and to improve the lives of your citizens, and to let them believe that there is a reason why you should give the People's National Movement another opportunity to return.
I asked the question because when there was the transition from Patrick Manning to Keith Rowley, there were persons who never came on board.
Yes.
And I mean, we look now and we see people like Kennedy Sawatsing over on the other side. We see people like Karen Nunes Teixeira, well, just all wherever she is at this point. But the fact is, there were senior people who were never incorporated into.
But you see it in both political parties. I mean, recently you had people like, Parry, Anita Haynes. I mean, if you go back, let's talk even the formation of Club 88. I mean, in the People's National Movement, in essence, has remained the People's National Movement. But you have seen in various, going from the ULF to the UNC to the PPOG. I mean, and in some cases, you have had some people remaining and you have some people changing. But as it relates specifically to the People's National Movement, we have to be conscious that you have had transitions, that you have had several leaders, as I said, from Dr. Eric Williams, and even when you made the change from Dr. Eric Williams at the time to George Chambers, even then there were issues, whether it was with Kamaluddin Mohammed, and then you came, you had Patrick Manning, you had three people remaining, Patrick Manning, Muriel McDonough, Maurice Marshall, and there were issues then, then with Dr. Rowley. So I am not going to fool myself into believing that the transition is going to be easy. So that, yes, you may have a Freddie Ferrer saying he doesn't support you as leader. There may be several people, as was said, some people may say all sorts of different things, but if you have accepted the responsibility to lead, it is your duty as the leader to reach out to persons who are disenchanted. It is your duty to do the reflection, to go out into the constituencies and do your best to be the best possible leader that the membership expects you to be. And that for sure is what I'll be doing. Yes, the healing. As I said, people are hurting. They're not hiding it. When you go out into the many constituencies, they are very, very blunt in saying to you that they're hurt. In many instances, disappointed about when the election was called, they were not ready. So that you have to be conscious of it, and you have to do your best and learn from some of the experiences. Because I was there, during Mr. Manning. I joined when Mr. Chambers was there, so I have been able to see. And one of the big issues that has come up is to ensure that you don't ostracize people. It has come up openly. So the fact that it's being discussed and the fact that people are willing to tell you, the reasons in some instances why they didn't vote, and I'm talking now about the PNM membership specifically, you have to take it on board and you have to find a solution as to how to address it. Because if you don't do it, then, as you have said, there are some people who would feel that there is no reason why they should return to the party. So we have to find a way where, we look at it again in the rebuilding and certainly make the party look as attractive as possible not just to the PNM, because if you have to win the election, it's not just your PNM members, those who are on the fence, your floating voters, so it requires all of that.
Internally in the party, we did not see Stuart Young yesterday, but did he or Dr. Rowley reach out to congratulate you?
Well, they haven't done that as yet, but I mean, certainly when I was appointed, I got an official letter from Dr. Rowley. And at the time when, in terms of the leader of the opposition, yes, I mean, and Mr. Young has attended our caucus meetings, you know. Well, yesterday, it was yesterday. I mean, there's still time. I mean, the 29th is when it's official. So, you know. Yeah.
How do you think that reflects to the population as you're talking about healing and rebuilding, but some people may still have questions about healing and rebuilding within the party itself? You say there's still some friction within the party.
Yeah, but that's not anything unusual. I mean, if you look at what's happening with the Democrats and the Republicans, the Conservatives and Labour Party in Britain, you know, if you look at what's happening in Germany, I mean, we are not supposed to be the exception to the rule. If you're either a student of politics or you're studying politics, look at in Africa with Mandela and the changing. I mean, it's real. You can't. It's not an issue that you can just expect that's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, people are human, you know. Politicians are all human. So the point about it is you have to be dedicated and committed to understand that when you remove from government to opposition, there's a lot of pain. People lose their jobs. All sorts of things happen. So it requires you to sometimes seek assistance, as we did when I remember in 2020. I mean, you have your team building exercise. I remember Mr. Manning, we going up to Libya for 2 weeks. So I've had the experience of being in and out. I started in opposition. I've been an opposition MP. I was in government. So I've been in opposition on more than one occasion, and I have seen how some of the leaders have dealt with it. Sometimes you require assistance from experts, people who understand team building, who understand hurt, who understand changes. And internationally, we are seeing, even in the Caribbean, we are seeing changes that take place. So how do you learn from some of your other colleagues? I mean, how do you deal with it? At the UN, even when you have elections and the Secretary General, or even when you move as an ambassador, I mean, these things happen all the time. It's whether you're willing to learn, whether you're going to be open-minded, whether you're going to realize that it is not going to be an exercise. But as I said, having offered myself to lead and having been successful at it, my duty is to ensure a people's national movement that is 70 years plus, that has withstood the test of time, that has had several leaders, and I have the great opportunity now to be one of those. My responsibility is to ensure the sustainability of the party, not just for the founders, but for the many people who are very proud to be be a member of the People's National Movement.
How are you dealing with it in terms of, you said that all different things can be done, people have to accept? Do you think that there has to be some kind of kumbaya moment, some sort of retreat, some sort of, I don't know, therapy, working together? How are you treating?
All of those things, you have to have a treat, you have to have a truth and reconciliation, but that's what I've been doing, right? I mean, I have said that from the first week, I went to Tobago, I went to Labrie, I've been to Point Fortin. No, but that is equally important. I mean, because the point about it is, as leaders, as members of parliament, you cannot divorce the issue of the constituencies from the members of parliament. It's equally important. So I'm also getting feedback, because they're very blunt from the constituents about MPs, about how they have performed, about whether or not they felt that you had sufficient office days, whether you lost connection. You cannot divorce the issue of representation from the issue of leadership and the issue of how your party goes forward. So the rebuilding exercise has to involve the constituencies, have to involve the MPs, and as MPs, like any other organization, if you're in a business, you have to sit down, do your reflection, do your open discussion, and move forward. So we are doing it both at the level of our MPs as well as at the level of the constituency.
And related to that, I think a post-mortem of the election, has there been a post-mortem by the MPs? I know you've gone to all the constituencies, but have the MPs sat down and said, listen, this is why we lost. This is what people have said. Who in fact was not listening? Was it one person? Was it all of us? Do we have a shared responsibility in terms of we did not listen as a team? Did we take decisions as a team that impacted on the results? Should we have not taken the salary increase, for example, as a cabinet? Should we have, fought that decision? And have you done that sort of thing
Yes,
where
well, yeah.
this kind of soul searching, real soul searching, as to what the party, the government, what the government and the members of the cabinet did?
Yeah, well, we started last week, and in those meetings, you have the candidates, you have the campaign manager, you have the chairman of constituencies. So those are three critical people. And I mean, people are. So that's part of the postmortem. That was the first exercise. We will have several of those. And they are bringing to those meetings, having had their individual discussions at their various constituencies. So you have 41 constituencies, and all those 41 constituencies are represented, and all 41 constituencies are making their presentations. And then it, of course, at the leadership level, it's then for us to do our own analysis based on what is brought before us, to then go to the respective constituencies and look at it and do what you call the scientific data, scientific analysis. Because you do have people traditionally on the ground who can give you very good information. Some of them felt that we didn't access them. So you just don't take your executive and your candidate, but you then also relate, go and get some feedback from the constituents. Okay? Yes?
The new government said that you all left office and left the place in a mess with things not working. I just want to know, how was the office of the leader of the opposition?
Well, listen, like everything else, I came here, and the parliament, before we would have accessed it, they would have done their own assessment, they would have done some preliminary work, so I would not have seen here the way the opposition left it. And then you would come and you are in a position to say what things you would like, improvements, so, within a reasonable time, they were able to get things back up and running.
You're comfortable, you're not going to work from home, you're going to be here?
Yes, I was here yesterday at 7:30. I was here this morning at 7:45. And yes, I'll be working from right here. Yes, and as I said, it's open for business for members of the public.